Thank you very much, Karen Power. Thank you, Quiet Music Ensemble. Thank you, Ensemble Mosaic, for this very touching and touching piece with touching pictures and sounds. Dalia Borsche, do you want to say something? Yeah, you can take it. This is Dalia Borsche from DAAD, that is responsible for the Berliner Künstlerprogramm, and I think Karen Power was here 10 years ago, right?
That's right. Thank you, Leonie. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Dalia Borsche. I'm running the music and sound department at the DAAD, as Leonie just said. And Karen Power was one of our fellows exactly 10 years ago, in 2015. And to see that she still has such a good and active relationship to Berlin and the German contemporary music scenes is for us a wonderful success and a wonderful moment of togetherness. So we are super happy that we can add also a moment of togetherness after this concert with a little reception, and I would like to warmly invite all of you to stay for a glass afterwards to exchange about these impressions we just had, and the relationship of Karen to Berlin, this fantastic piece. Karen, congratulations. It is hard to find words after such a powerful piece. And thanks, of course, also to all the fantastic musicians, and thanks to this platform, the Klangwerkstatt festival, that is taking place and providing a platform for contemporary music and exchange against all odds since so long, with so much persistence and passion. So also thank you to the organizers, and also thanks to Ernst von Siemens. Yeah, that's an applause, absolutely. Thanks to Ernst von Siemens Musikstiftung, and also thanks to Culture Island. I would like to pass the mic on to Candice Gordon, and thanks also for the wonderful collaboration again.
Thank you, everybody. I won't say too much more. I think Dalia really covered a lot of it there. I am the head of cultural affairs at the Embassy of Ireland in Berlin, and I work closely with Culture Ireland to support Irish artists to present work in Germany. And of course, with the Embassy of Ireland, we are very, very keen to foster these relationships with such organisations as the DAAD and the festival Klangwerkstatt. So we couldn't be happier that this amazing premiere happened at this festival tonight. And as Dalia said, it was very special to be here in the room. And the Embassy of Ireland would like to invite you to these drinks with the DAAD after the talk. We also, just very quickly to say, this is the second time we're happy to support together the presentation, as we did last year for our initiative Zeitgeist Irland 24, which Karen Power and Quiet Music Ensemble featured in, and we have a beautiful book that they're heavily featured in as well. And if any of you would like to have a look at the book, we have a few at the reception as well. So you can speak to myself or my colleague Sarah, who is there. So thank you. Enjoy the talk, and see you then in the bar.
All right, Till, Karen. As you wish. Thanks again for this amazingly beautiful piece. Let's start with talking about your piece. So, it was, as we could undoubtedly see and hear, based on field recordings from the Arctic and the Antarctic. And I think your first journey to the Arctic was in 2013. And it was just yesterday that I've listened to a radio feature on the Antarctic. and those various tipping points with regard to the climate that have been reached obviously only in the last couple of years, rather surprisingly to the scientificans. So how come that you decided to make those journeys, those research journeys, to such remote and icy places in those fragile environments?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your ears for 61 minutes and 10 seconds. So I'll just admit it. I'm completely ice obsessed. I've been following ice for 15 years. In 2013, I was fortunate enough to go to the Arctic for the first time. And I basically wanted to get somewhere where I could listen to the ice undisturbed. So a lot of my field recording focuses on less human places, because I love humans, we're great, but we are everywhere. So it becomes quite difficult to hear a place, to recognize the language of a place, and to let a place speak in its language. So this is a big thing for me. So I went to the Arctic in 2013, and it changed everything for me. I can't put it into words, that's why I write the pieces, but it really did affect all my senses. It just unsteadied me. And so then I thought, okay, I've been to the Arctic, I really have to go to Antarctica. And of course, the big thing is that we look, and I know I used videos tonight, so we look at these places and we see an awful lot. But there's an awful lot that we miss, because maybe we're too busy looking and not listening. So the Antarctica trip and the second Arctic trip was about this sort of sonic pole to pole for me. To try to go to these places, to try to listen, to try to understand, to try to hear. Well, the last trip to the Arctic, there was an underlying question at the very beginning of the trip was, can we hear climate change, and is listening to climate change, does this offer something different? Does this allow us to change our perspective enough that maybe it opens up some awareness in us that encourages us to behave differently? Because clearly the pictures aren't working. So it was a kind of, at the end of the day, I'm an artist, I'm a composer, interested in sound and obsessed with ice. So I was following the ice, and then the places changed me. They made me search more, they made me go back, they made me, and you can imagine getting to Antarctica is quite an expensive, difficult thing to do. So that took the bones of a decade before I could convince enough people to try and, write some works and make it work that way. And then back to the Arctic in 2024.
I mean, you could have made a completely documentary piece of just, field recordings and the images, but you decided to translate the sound, or perhaps translation is not the right word, but to add instruments and to bring those sound worlds together, like the documentary, the real sound world, and the rather imaginative sound world of instruments. Why did you decide to work that way? I mean, I know that is how you work quite often, but what is the fascinating thing about that for you?
I think it's just about, there's a number of things. One, I think I am constantly in search for the conversation. So, what happens when you put something that does not belong to our language and our world next to the language and our world? So in musical terms, you have these noises or these sounds that maybe get dismissed or aren't heard. And then on the other hand, you have these wonderfully trained musicians with all their musical context and all their history and all these things. And then what happens when you put them in a room together? What happens when you ask them to have a conversation? So the musician and the instrumentalist starts thinking about maybe their instrument different, maybe their language different, and it then allows us to hear the ice differently. So perhaps it's just that missing link that maybe changes our perspective to change our relationship. So a lot of my work is obviously there's active listening involved, but also with the performers. So the way the score is made, they're listening to private little oral parts, and they're also listening to the room. They're responding to everything in the room, so everything gets its chance to be heard, and then it kind of becomes part of the conversation. So it's a human-in-human dialogue that allows us, and same with the videos, like they appear the same, but there's always a slightly different perspective and a different way of viewing it. Because I do think that there's something in that. There's something in shaking yourself up and kind of going, oh, maybe if I just look at it this way, or I think about it this way, or something. So it's kind of an invitation to offer that time and space for maybe something fresh to emerge. I hope that answers your question.
Totally. And there was a conversation on another level as well. You had 2 ensembles instead of 1. Why did you decide to take 2 ensembles?
Yeah, this was obviously very indulgent. So I've worked with Ensemble Mosaic since I was here in 2015. And every time they blow me away. I've also worked with Quiet Music Ensemble a lot. They're very different ensembles, but I felt that there was something there that if you bring them together, that it will unearth something in each ensemble to bring something unique into the space. And I think it worked. There is a kind of a live energy that's about trying to communicate, trying to reach, trying to be together. So it was really just about that sort of, again, different languages and what happens, and to sort of be part of that conversation.
All right, then Till, let's switch to you. You are not a musician in your everyday work.
I used to play in a punk rock band when I was 13. I don't know if that counts.
Okay, that counts, but your everyday life, you are doing something else. And you are dealing with the environment and the effects of climate change. And before we dive into your expertise and your field of work, could you briefly say what's your impression of the piece? How is it to experience a topic you deal with in a completely different way here?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, first of all, congratulations to you and the musicians, and very, very impressive indeed. I guess life in between poles is an emotional roller coaster, right? Like you have the beauty, you have the life, you have the threats, you have anxiety, and I guess in that sense the poles in general do represent the Earth system, even from a scientific perspective, very well, right? Like many things you can see in the Earth system are represented in the poles, but being here and listening to it, of course, has the advantage that I think we don't only have a crisis of climate and crisis of inequality and crisis of polarization and crisis of trust, but also crisis of imagination in a way, and I think that's then the advantage of art, which gets you to the emotional touch points better than graphs, books, information, and talks can do. So very impressive indeed.
And I already mentioned you work at the Club of Rome, which until now is probably most known by the first crucial book publication in 1972, The Limits to Growth. And you also work for the initiative Earth for All. And for all who either haven't heard of it or who are not completely sure what it is, can you say a few words about these organizations and their history and your current activities?
Sure, and I would say, as for the Club of Rome, the grayer the hair, the better known the organization. I think from 1972, many might still know this book, The Limits to Growth, later summarized by one of the authors, Dennis Meadows, as millions of people thought we were right, millions of people thought we were wrong, and a few people have actually read the book, which I think is a very, very accurate summary of what happened, because what happened in '72 was based on computer simulations and a lot of data, a lot of information, the first big computers at MIT. Scientists try to assess what happens if our material growth on our Earth, the resource destruction, but also the pollution in our oceans and the forests, etc., continues, and build different scenarios, and basically said that if the growth trends continue, as it was early in the 70s, we will overrun the capacities, the carrying capacities of our Earth. We will reach the limits to growth. And that was a simple message, basically no unlimited growth on a finite planet. It's not that revolutionary, actually, if you think about it. It's quite logical, like it makes sense, like you can't extract more than the Earth provides. But there was fierce resistance. Like already in the 70s, Ronald Reagan said there are no limits to growth because there are no limits to our dreams. That continued. There was a whole narrative we see repeating today, right? Like, no, markets will fix it. If resources become scarce, price mechanisms will make sure that the other resources are being used, and thereby we fix it. We just explain it as externalities, what happens to the Earth, and then price it in, and then, and it's interesting because you see the debate repeating itself today as it happened in the last decades. The answer back then was, we need innovation, we need technological solutions. That was 50 years ago. Yesterday, Friedrich Merz was in Belém, was in Brazil, saying we need technological solutions and innovation. What that has done now, we have breached 7 of 9 planetary boundaries. We often talk about climate, and that is a crucial topic, but we also, see decreasing biodiversity. We see the problems at the poles, at the oceans, in the air. Everywhere we have built up an economic system that is exceeding the limits of our planet. And that is kind of, since 50 years, the work at the Club of Rome to look at solutions out of that. And indeed now also Earth for All. You mentioned before enabling a conversation between the poles and the musicians. In our case, it was enabling a conversation between climate scientists and critical economists, I would say. And together with them build another computer model and think through where are we today and what could be potential solutions to this crisis. And last word on this, which is not only environmental, but also social, right? What we try to do with Earth for All is to say, hey, there are not only environmental tipping points, there are also social tipping points. That societies are eroding trust, and all of that is not unrelated together. If you look at it from a systemic perspective, you see that climate change and inequality, for example, is crucially linked. It's very, very closely together. Just maybe one data point here at the Music Art, but if you look at the emissions, the top 10% income earners in the world are responsible for 50% of the emissions, the top 1% responsible for 17% of the emissions in the world, right? So you have a crucial intrinsic distribution component within the climate debate. And that is a project of Earth for All, to see what are policy solutions that can kind of tackle those things together.
And you developed a couple of scenarios for the next 50 years or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was a work from the Club of Rome from the beginning. Club of Rome was never about predictions. Never said it's certainly going to be that way or that way. No one can do that. We're not fortune tellers. But you can develop scenarios and see what happens if we continue this pathway or this pathway. And in the Limits to Growth, it was 12 different scenarios. By the way, also with positive outcomes. The authors back then were not that negative. They were like 27-year-old MIT students saying, yeah, we can save the world. We didn't overshoot the planet back then. They just said we will in 50 years if we are not careful. Well, but what happened back then was that the scenarios, everyone focused on the doomsday ones. So this time we just developed 2 scenarios, and 2 simple ones. One is too little too late, and one is giant leap. The too little too late scenario is basically the current trend we are on. And what we see on that is that not only we will of course breach the 1.5 degrees, climate change is increasing over 2 degrees, potentially 3 degrees, but we also see that our social basis, our societies, the trust is more eroding, social tensions are rising. I mean, the book was published 5 years ago, the international one, right? And back then, the warning of the social breakdown, actually, that this could be earlier than an environmental one, we try to articulate very loudly. And I think that current developments prove it right. But opposed to that, there's this other scenario which we call giant leap. And in this giant leap scenario, we try to describe policy solutions across 5 different thematic fields, which is energy, food as kind of the biggest environmental threats, but then empowerment, inequality, and poverty as the social foundations. And see how do all of these things interact. They're not decoupled from each other, right? They all interact. They all belong together. Like, you know, at the polar regions, the melting ice, the life, the penguin, whatever, all of that belongs together. All of that is in a symbiotic relationship in a way. And describing that was the goal of these scenarios.
And for people who are like completely convinced capitalists and who are only interested in money, even the money thing could be an argument, right? When it comes to what does climate change cost?
Exactly. I mean, you can go down that route of the market route, right? I mean, we have all these numbers of the costs of climate change that we already see now, right? Like droughts, heat waves, all of that. Now, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research estimates that this alone, the current climate change will lead to 20% GDP decrease until 2050. So you can already say that, hey, protecting our climate now is actually good for our economies. I would add another point here. What we see certainly now is that protecting our climate, especially the energy revolution, is good for our geopolitical stance in the world, right? We are at the moment, we made ourselves dependent from states like Russia on gas and oil. And if we look around where else we get our fossil resources from, it's not that this is the most nicest democracies we have to deal with in that sense. So being independent there, it's not only, and I think that's a good question, because it's not only about this moral, green, hippie, we want to save the world and it's a beautiful place thing, which of course is also true, but it's also about economic reasons and geopolitical reasons that basically are needed to provide a stable future. And last point on that, I think there is no scenario of just business as usual continuing as we are now, right? The world is changing either direction. The poles are decreasing, the ice shield is going down, and the question is how do we manage it, and how do we deal with the consequences? And I think sometimes at the moment we're rather closing the eyes than confronting it with policy solutions that are out there.
I would be interested in, you also published this book, Tax the Rich, and I think some opponents might argue that if it gets more unattractive for super rich people to pay their taxes here, for instance, they will transfer their tax residency to another country, which would be even more harmful for us. What do you reply in such conversations?
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, we have mechanisms to prevent that. I mean, that's now going very much into the detail there, but you have like taxes that prevent people to bring their money outside, right? Wegzugssteuern, in a way. You also see that at the moment, the biggest threats of why people with their companies leave the country are not the tax rules, but rather the lack of employees in the country and kind of cheap labor forces outside of that. And of course, but again, maybe the biggest thing, and that's both true for tax and for climate, is that we do have all solutions on the table for international collaboration there, right? Like there were solutions in Brazil for a 2% minimum tax for billionaires coordinated across all G20 countries. 2 countries didn't participate last year, US and back then under a former finance minister, Christian Lindner in Germany, that also opposed that rule. If you have an international coordinated tax system where people don't flee, then it's not too hard to implement that.
When seeing what's going on in the world and when talking about climate, we often tend, understandably, to fall into dystopian thoughts, right? But in the end, that can't be a solution as well. So what could be approaches, or what are your ideas and plans for the next years to not fall into a dystopian attitude?
I mean, what I think we tried with Earth for All or the Club of Rome is at least through kind of rational access information data to show another future is possible, right? And I think that art is much better in transporting that emotionally, and that's why this is so great as well, because I think you often people often think they feel or they behave after the facts they read or something, but it's much more that the sentiment is first, and then you try to gather the facts around the sentiments to prove your point mind and to prove the sentiments. So what our contribution in that sense, I would say, is to show that this, what we frame well-being for all on a finite planet, is possible, and if you go in a very practical level, you see the advantages. Even if climate change wasn't a thing, right? Even if all these deniers were like, yeah, sure, it's the sun, it's not as humans. What would we have then? We would have cleaner cities with less traffic, rivers you can swim it, independent energy solutions, food that actually tastes like food, coming from regenerative sources, a system that is fair. I mean, we have at the moment still 4 billion people in the world living from less than $4 a day. You see that the cutting of USAID, probably there was a fourth article saying it already killed tens of thousands of people in the last months. Like all of that, with even regardless, taking the climate thing out, there is the possibility of a just system. And I think that's something we can prove. And then there's this Mark Fisher quote saying it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I think in that sense we can say that with facts and information another world is possible. But I think what today also is more important, that art can show that the feeling of the emotional access of this other world is possible. And I think that's just equally important, particularly today.
This is a very nice ending. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for being here.